Are you looking for inspiration on a daily basis? Then check out Deal to Heal Teas. With our inspirational teas, you're sure to find something to inspire you. That's dealtohealteas.com. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear inspirational tea and be inspired all day. Let's go to dealtohealteas.com. Again, that's dealtohealteas.com. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, then I know you enjoy the Girl Dad Discussion podcast. I'm your host, Ernest James, and I believe the relationship between a daughter and her father is one of the most important relationships a young lady can have. And therefore, my mission is to promote the daddy-daughter relationship by sharing the voices of girl dads to the world. So check out our podcast on every platform where podcasts can be listened to. And if you want to watch the podcast, check us out on our YouTube channel. Again, that's the Girl Dad Discussions podcast with your host, Ernest James. Welcome to Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. On this podcast, my guest and I will discuss topics and ways to help us to heal in every area of our lives. I believe that everyone can live a life that is happy, healthy, and whole. So I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. I am your host, Ernest James, and I believe that everyone can and should live a life that is whole, healed, and healthy. And therefore, I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with your problems, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. If you haven't already, make sure that you guys listen, like, subscribe, and share to our podcast on our new podcast channel. So we changed our original podcast YouTube channel, which was the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. We now changed it to the Deal to Heal Podcasting Network, right? So the Deal to Heal Podcasting Network. Make sure you guys go there on YouTube to check out our new YouTube channel. And also, while you're there, make sure that you check out our partner podcast, the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, which I'm the host of, and also our other podcasts that we have there, including the Love Walk Faith Talk. Yes, the Love Walk Faith Talk podcast, which is a Bible study podcast, and also the Earn and Herb podcast, which is a podcast that I do with my brother. Also, guys, make sure that you guys check out, just in case you ever thought about starting your own podcast, make sure you go to check out our ebooks at ebooksbyejames.com, and you could look into getting your copy of the ebook, Start Your Podcast Now, right? This is Start Your Podcast Now ebook. So you can start teaching you how to start your podcast in only 3 steps. It is a podcast that I wrote myself. So definitely you guys can check it out. Definitely, I think it's worth every cent that you guys have to get into it if you want to start your own podcast. So product of the week before we get started. As you guys know, we are a self-sustained podcast, and the way that we stay on the air is by bringing you amazing products for you to purchase. So our products of the week for this week is our Purpose Journal as well as our Purpose Planner. I believe that we have to journal, or we should journal, in order to see or remind ourselves where we are and where we've been. And at the same time, we should plan our future so we know where we're going. So you guys can get your Purpose Journal and Purpose Planner in order to help us stay on the air and pay some bills and have some amazing products. The links is definitely be in the descriptions below. So make sure you guys check that out. Again, that is our product of the week. So We're going to jump right in it today. Just like any other day, we are blessed with a guest, Mr. Ronald. How you doing?
I'm great, Mr. Ernest. How are you today?
I am good. I am good. First of all, let me say thank you for being here. Because you could have been doing anything else with anyone else, but you are here with me and my listeners, and we definitely appreciate it. So thank you for being here. And we're going to jump right on in it. Do me a favor, introduce yourself to my audience and let us know a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Absolutely, and thank you for extending the invitation for me to be here tonight. And again, my name is Ronald McCray. I am a speaker, two-time author, gospel recording artist, father, husband, professional photographer, um, part-time Uber driver on the side, um, professional foodie, Starbucks lover. So that's a little bit about me.
Okay. Okay. So, well, that's a little bit about who you are. But that's not the reason why we're here. We're actually here to learn a little bit more about you and your story. And definitely, as my listeners know, I bring on people, on this platform in order to who have been through some things, and have overcame those things, and some of the things that I haven't may not have experienced, and so we're here with you today. So do me a favor, if you could just tell us a little bit about your story,
Mhm.
and definitely being a speaker, I know you've dove into it plenty of times, but tell us a little bit about your story so we know, kind of what was your um, thing that you kind of struggled with and how you got over it.
Sure. So a little bit about my story is I guess the first trauma, if I can call it that. It's unfortunate that I have a number to count from, but the first one I would say was being born into a single parent household. You know that pain that a child feels of not having mom and dad together and
Mm.
not understanding why they're not together. And so I just remember being a little boy and feeling like, oh, it must be my fault. I was so used to seeing them like at odds with one another and arguing, and I felt like, well, maybe if I wasn't here, then that would solve their issues. 6 years old, thinking about ending my life. What a sad reality for a child. I had a very big family. My mother is one of six children. All of my aunts and uncles are um, they're all believers and involved in ministry in various ways, from singers to preachers and teachers, you name it. So I had a great introduction to Christianity, the Christian faith, as a little boy. But not only my mom's side, but my dad, he and his family are believers as well. And so, to be more specific, I was raised in the Pentecostal church. So I was used to hearing people like shouting and dancing and speaking in tongues. Like that was a norm for, my experience of going to church. And so, again, growing up in a single parent household and being in the middle of the parent war, one weekend I was with mom, one weekend I was with dad. Um, and I think around about 7 years old, was the first time that I experienced sexual abuse. There was an older male relative and two of his male friends who um, would like watch porn with me in the room and like experiment on me, like what they saw the guys doing to the women in the films. And so I can't even tell you how long it happened, but it was like a continual thing. Sometimes there was involvement of weapons, like being forced to perform um, oral sex. Um, and, I'm just this innocent little kid not knowing what was happening. I thought it must have been fine, or that it wasn't anything bad per se, because the, the family member that was in the room, he would have been the person that I should have been able to look to for protection and safety,
Mm.
not knowing that he was, the main perpetrator of my abuse. And so um, it broke me in a lot of different ways, in ways that I couldn't have even put into words. Um, as a child, just wrestling with different feelings. And I remember the first time I felt shame. I don't know, like if you or any of the other listeners can like recall that first moment where it feels like there's this stain on you, like of guilt or wrongdoing for something that you had done, and that shame was like imposed on me as if I, wanted to do like that. I was a consenting adult to these
Mhm.
experiences, but I was a child, and so I lived with that shame for many, many years until one day God set me free from it. But I probably had about 9 abusers that I can recount. Um, the majority being male and one being female, and so I just really grew up in an identity crisis, unsure of who I was, being very young and experiencing same sex attraction, and not knowing that um, young boys, and I guess the same would be for girls as well, who have experienced abuse by a member of the same sex. There's a period of like sexual identity confusion that individual
Mhm.
goes through. So I just really wrestled within myself, unsure of who I was, and just I started drinking probably around like 15, 16, and having a lot of sex, not realizing that the things that I was doing was a trauma response. Um,
Mhm.
I became very rebellious, and I'll say it this way: like high school was a challenge for me. Like I barely graduated. Like I skipped my whole ninth grade year, like drinking and hanging out with the wrong people. Um, but I guess I was looking for something to help me to cope with the pain of life,
Mhm.
um, the pain of the things that had happened to me, the pain of at times experiencing like rejection and abandonment by my father. He had an addiction to drugs and alcohol, so he was more absent than he was present, and it left me feeling like I didn't deserve his love. I didn't deserve his time. And I would ask questions to my mom like, why doesn't he love me? Like, what's wrong with me? And so I started to look outwardly for that love in different places and things, and relationships and sex, and again drinking and clubbing, and just kind of wilding out, if I can put it in those terms. And I just kind of reached this place where I was tired of living, tired of life. I felt like the pain was a continuum, and there was no end to my pain. And so I felt like the only way to cope, well, not even to cope, but to end the pain, um, was to not be here anymore. Very depressed, and in the Black community at that time, therapy wasn't really something that was talked about. It was this thing for like quote unquote crazy people who have psychotic breaks. Um, but I I didn't know that I could go to someone and tell them that I'm hurting inside and that I need help. Um,
Yeah.
and to do that would have been an exercise of faith and bravery, because for Black men to express weakness and vulnerability is often frowned upon. Um, and I didn't have like a lot of examples of Black men around me who were comfortable being emotional and expressing themselves um, when they were in pain or when they were sad. We were taught to bottle it up. I remember when I was a little kid, my dad said, men and boys don't cry. And so that taught me to shut off the natural part of me that God created, which is to feel and to be able to express those feelings. And it wasn't until like years older that I learned that suppressing my feelings was actually killing me. Not
Right.
physically, but um, it was destroying my mental health. It was destroying
Right.
my relationships and my ability to connect and relate healthily with others. So just to kind of like fast forward, I always acknowledge God's role in my journey of healing,
Mm.
because when I, gave my life to the Lord in 2009, I was, filled with the Holy Spirit. Like, I like to say that that was the day that like life began to like turn in the positive direction
Right.
for me. And it was a very real experience for me where it wasn't this superficial thing, or that there was this like distant God that I was learning about, but he was personal, and he revealed himself to me as a healer. Um, I didn't understand the complexities of my pain and my trauma, but he did. And
Right.
in order for me to begin to heal, I had to be vulnerable with him. And I had to take a step of faith to trust that this God that I was getting to know had my best interest at heart and actually loved me. And this year will be 15 years that I've been walking with God, and he's proved to be everything he said to be. So that's a little bit of my story.
Right. Okay. Cool. Cool. Because I want to go back. I don't want to interrupt you, but I was like, I want to be like, pause. Wait a minute. Right. So, so I want to go back. I want to go back some in the story. So first of all, I want to say thank you. Right. Thank you for the bravery. And I know you mentioned about the faith and the bravery that it took for you to even admit it then, but it still takes that same amount of faith and bravery to admit it now.
Mhm.
To come forward and as a man and say, look, this is what happened to me. This is how I felt,
Mhm.
because there are many of men that are dealing with things and not coming forth to say, this is what happened to me, especially when something happens sexually
Right.
to us. We're very cut off from admitting it, because again, going back to that shame that
Yes.
we feel, even if it's at a point, that we don't even recognize it. Like you said, when you were young, like you couldn't consent, like you weren't even
Right.
of age yet,
Right.
to even know what was happening, and yet and still the effects of it still, was harming to you.
Yeah.
Um, I want to talk about a couple of things, and I know you mentioned about your father not being, full time as active as he could be, and
Mhm.
even after this happened to you, having this period of time where
Mhm.
you're kind of confused sexually and even kind of looking for acceptance. Do
Yeah.
you think that your father not being there, in a full time capacity, should I say,
Mhm.
even added to that confusion and that longing for acceptance, maybe?
Absolutely. I think like so in the opening part of the podcast, you may mention that the most important relationship that a young girl can have is with her father, and I would argue that the same is for young boys. That
Mhm.
the most important relationship that they can have is with their fathers as well, because the father is supposed to be the example that models masculinity, that calls out the young boy's identity and tells him who he is. And so, um, not having that, uh, my father's presence um, in my life for many years left a lot of questions and left me to figure things out for myself. And it's like, shout out to all the moms who have had to be mom and dad.
Mhm.
However, at the same time, they still like they can't replace
Right.
the actual role of the father.
Yeah.
That's not a put down to women. It's just, uh, it's what it is. It's
Right.
reality.
The reality of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so not having my father there, actually, it did hurt a lot. And my father, he was a very like rough around the edges kind of guy. And so I didn't relate well with what I perceived masculinity to be from him. I was always a very like artistic kind of kid. I didn't enjoy contact sports. I didn't want to be like hit and like, I don't. That just was not me. I was the kid that enjoyed the arts and drama, and poetry, and gymnastics, and all those things that unfortunately caused me to be labeled as gay, and I didn't even know what that meant. But for whatever reason, like again, within our community, like we apply labels to things that are not, to men and boys who I guess don't follow what the Black community may consider to be cultural norms of
Yeah.
the community. And so, you know, I didn't even have my father to speak to him about the things that people were saying to me and the labels that they were calling me, for him to be able to engage me in conversation about what I was feeling inside, and to explain to me what these things meant, because I had, again, a lot of questions in my head. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I want to touch on that a little bit because I'm a PK, right? Raised up in the church, Pentecostal church. You know what I mean? Preachers, pastors, the whole 9 yards in my family, and yet even myself had some experiences, should I say, even within the church with the labels and even the questioning of your manhood at some points, right? Because I have a soft voice. I've always had a soft voice. It was even softer when I was younger, and sort of like yourself, even though there were some physical sports and things that I like to play, but yeah, I was an artistic kid too. I still write poetry, write poetry, drawing, all those things. And then I was also an introvert, so I'm really quiet. And so even growing up in the church, with even some family members, there was a stigma like, all right, he's gonna be gay, or maybe he's gay, even with that. And even to the point where in my teenage years, right, because I wasn't promiscuous, you know what I mean? So first of all, I'm gonna go on a tangent, but first of all, we're taught we ain't even supposed to be having sex. You know what I mean? You're not supposed to have sex after marriage. You know what I mean? You know that whole thing. And yet, when you don't do it or don't outwardly pursue it, then they question you.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that was me. Number one, I'm shy, right? Number two, I got a soft voice. Number three, I've been learning my whole life that we're supposed to sustain until marriage. So I'm not even pursuing that. Even as a teenager, I'm like, I'm okay. You know what I'm saying? But then it's like, now you're looking at me side eye. I'm doing what you told me to do. You know what I'm saying? But now you're looking at me side eye and still, again, putting those labels or even questioning, you know, which I was very confident in who I was. Thanks to my parenting with, I grew up in a 2-parent household with my mom and my dad. My dad, very stern and solid in who he was, but my mom also very, very smart and very nurturing. And so all of us grew up with a strong sense of who we were as our own stuff. Like we were at a young age be able to stand up and say, no, this is me. You know what I'm saying? Because of how we was raised. So those things that were being said didn't affect me. It probably hurt my feelings. You know what I mean? But yet and still, it didn't affect me personally as to make me question who I was raised to be. You know what I'm saying? But I just had to touch on that because I know it's a real thing. You know what I mean? Like the very people who, and I'm not putting down the church. Again, I'm a PK pastor, all of that. So I love the church. But there are people in the church, and there are some church normalities that have to be called out in order for a stop to be put to it. And that's just one of them. Right. But I want to go fast back for it. Fast back for it. You were mentioning about coming up in a norm in a community where, especially in the Black community and in the Black church community, where therapy is not necessarily looked at as as an option, right? And so this is definitely a topic I've talked about plenty of times. That it's not either or, but is this and right? That should be therapy and Jesus. You know what I'm saying? Therapy and prayer. It's not one or the other, because we're not one or the other. We're natural and spiritual. And so those two go together. And I definitely had my own experience when I was experiencing depression and suicidal ideations, and how I came to come out of that, definitely, which I had this mindset before I went through but definitely having come out of that, knowing that, okay, that definitely was a part that, my church community, my church family played, but then that also was a natural part, because I didn't go to therapy, but I went to bereavement therapy or group therapy, however you want to say it. And that made such a difference in my life, during that time period. So it was both of those things that helped me to come out of it. And so when you're, kind of overcoming the things that you went through, you know what I'm saying? Like, what was kind of your balance, or the way that your faith and therapy played a part in coming together to help you make it through that time period?
So what I think what helped me to pursue therapy was someone in the church telling me it's okay to pursue therapy, and that you seeking out like therapeutic um, help and counseling is not an aversion to your faith, because I believe that it was for so long because of like, and I'll say rhetoric that I've heard in Christendom at large, um, and so I had a lot of anxiety about that first therapy session. And I'm, praying like, Lord, I'm not like replacing you going into this. But of course, he already knows that, he knows my heart, but that's just where my mind was. And so I had barriers to overcome to be able to get to therapy and then to unpack life in therapy.
Yeah.
And so in that space, well, my therapist is also a believer, but it was incredibly beneficial, one, to be able to hear myself say things that I hadn't, maybe never communicated out loud before into
Yeah. Yep.
somebody else, and for them to extend compassion and empathy for me and to tell me it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to, if these talking about these things make you cry. Again, all of these are barriers that had to come down. And so just kind of navigating the space of faith in therapy, it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. It was kind of seamless when I think about it. Like my therapist would pray with me, in our sessions as well. So I didn't feel uneasy outside of just those like initial nerves. But now my therapist, I feel extremely comfortable with him. And I think that um, had God not led me to therapy, I might have been like, I might not have been as far along in my journey of healing as I am today.
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about that journey of healing, and how has that been for you? Because I know one of the things that you believe, which I'm sure is true, is that there's a journey to healing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not a overnight process, and it's not even necessarily a destination. I guess you could say
Mm-hmm.
a physical destination, maybe, but maybe it's a manifestation of a spiritual destination, probably. More so. So even in your healing journey,
Uh-huh.
what kind of has that been like? Even after I don't know how far removed you are from the therapy, or the original, sessions of therapy when you first started. But even to get to the point that you are now, how has that healing journey been? And what is the, if I can call it a destination, what do
Uh-huh.
you believe that destination of healing is, for us as a people in general?
Great question. And so the quote that I usually share is healing is the journey and wholeness is the destination. Uh,
Mhm.
Healing is the everyday work that we put into healing. And healing doesn't mean I meet with my therapist every day, or like healing to me means it means acknowledgement of pain.
Mm.
Um, it means willingness to um, work inwardly, um, on that pain. Like if visually I could give like an illustration, if there was a safe that like had all of my traumatic, painful experiences in it, and it lived inside of me, and I just kept it there, but I still lived life like it's still there. But I think a part of healing is opening and addressing the content of what's inside. And so um, I think everybody's destination is different. You know, for me, um, my goal of healing is to not allow the things that happen to me to define me and to control my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have the power to be able to define me for me. My trauma doesn't have that power over me anymore. Um, and so I think as a people, that destination, we have the opportunity to kind of put into words and vocabulary ourselves of like, what is it that you would like to see for your life? Because there are people who are stuck in the cycles of the trauma response, and they want to know that it's possible to break that cycle. They have concepts and ideas of what a life of freedom looks like. Maybe there's somebody in their life that is an example of what they would like to aspire toward, and identifying those measurable steps that will help them to walk in that freedom and that liberty and that power. I like to think that a part of healing is taking our power back. For those who have experienced various forms of trauma, it in many ways could be seen as a robbery, that something was taken away from us that we felt that we can't get back. For me, that was my voice, being forced into secrecy and quiet, being quiet about the things that happened, all the while being victimized and being traumatized and being tortured. But to reclaim my voice is to reclaim my power. That I don't have to live in fear because of what those individuals did to me, or that if, I don't have to be afraid that they might hear an interview that I'm sharing my story. Like that was a fear in and of itself. What
Mm-hmm.
will happen to me if I start speaking out? Because one of the individuals was very abusive to me as a child. And so just being able to reclaim my power and my voice allows me to take control of my life, because I remember a time when I was not in control of my life, when it felt like, well, not felt like only, but my life was spiraling out of control and I could not grab the reins, the horns of it. And so being able to sort through these experiences in therapy allows me to see a path forward. I think a lot of people in life don't know what the next step looks like, but
Mm-hmm.
being able to unpack the experiences, but not only that, but identify what my future looks like. What does the next step toward my ideal self look like? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I want to go back to two things that you said. First of all, let me say this. I'm glad that you found your voice, right? But because I think a lot of us lose our voice, and I don't mean that in a natural way, but I mean, that faith and that bravery that we need to speak on our life experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes, just as you said, sometimes it's a fear of how it will affect the people who are part of your story and maybe the part that they played in the story.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that I've learned, definitely over my years, we can't tell the story of Joseph without mentioning his brothers. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like that's where it started.
Right.
It started with his brothers. Everything that happened in his life, you know, was put on that trajectory because of the jealousy of his brothers, right? And even after that, the things that happened with him being thrown into the pit, and then being made advances to by Potiphar's wife. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like all of those things are, though it may make them feel some type of way,
Yeah.
but it's your story. You know what
Exactly.
I'm saying? And so we have to get to the point that we are confident and brave enough to tell our story no matter what happens, or how the people that play the part, how they feel about it. Because number one, if it's true, You know
Right.
what I mean? Like the part you played is the part you played. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? And so definitely congratulate you for finding your voice and using it. And want everyone to make sure that when we get to that place where we're strong enough to tell our stories, that we don't dim our light
Mhm.
because of how it may shine a spotlight on someone else. You know
Right.
what I mean? Because if that part of your story, as long as it's true
Right.
and it's real to you,
Mhm.
it is what it is. You
Yeah.
know. But I want to go back a little bit because you talked about the pain,
Mhm.
right? And you also talked about, going through a period of really thinking about possibly taking your own life,
Mhm.
right? And so I've definitely been through that, um, been in that space myself, right, in my life, and definitely before I went through my place where I felt, suicide ideations and having those thoughts. I think there was definitely a misconception, definitely on my part, but
Mhm.
definitely on the people that were around me too, of what that even looked like for a person to be even get to that point, right? And so that's one of the things why I mentioned about the pain, because that's one of the ways that I express it is when you start thinking about suicide and suicidal ideation, it's not a conversation of it's not a conversation of ending your life. It's a conversation of pain,
Right.
right? Because it's when you get to the point where you really don't feel or can't comprehend another way to end the pain. Not that you want to end your life,
Right.
you just want the pain to stop,
Yeah. Right.
and you came to a part a position in your life where you don't feel like there's another way,
Mhm.
and so I really want people to understand that, because I it's a misconception, and also we can't judge,
Mhm.
right? We can't judge what we can't see,
Right.
because a lot of time we judge people on the things that we see.
Right.
So when I was going through that time period of my life, it would have been easy to say that, oh, he took his own life because he went through a bad divorce, and that was nothing. I could have made it through a divorce, you know what I mean? But I always say you can only see what you see. You don't see everything that's up under that.
Right.
You don't see the emotional havoc that my divorce, sent me through. Especially being raised in a two-parent household, and I always thinking like that's the goal, and
Right.
then you make it to the goal, and then now it's pulled from under you. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And not only that, but to lose my mom in that same time period, to lose my mother-in-law, who I was very close to in that time period, to be in debt, and just like all of the layers of
Yeah.
things that it was. If you were to judge me only by my divorce, you're doing me a disservice, and
Yeah.
you're doing a disservice to the pain that I was feeling in that time period. And so I just like to share, shine a light on that, because people who've never experienced it don't get it. Like there's so many layers under that top layer of pain. You might see the top layer, but there's so many other layers up under that plays a pivotal point, even with someone even getting to that space. So I just wanted to say that. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I definitely wanted to just mention that.
Yeah. I think depression um, and anxiety and suicidal ideation is so misunderstood.
Mhm.
And like as you mentioned, we tend to focus on and make judgments about the decision that the person made of taking their life, or the way that they are responding to a situation, maybe depression and anxiety. Anxiety is the state that they're in, and you feel that you would make a different decision if you were in their life, in their shoes, but you're not in their shoes to know how they
Mhm.
feel, to know how they could reach that decision. And what I've learned, just like even throughout my professional career, when I was in management, people like my direct reports sometimes will come to me and say, "Hey, I'm struggling with suicidal thoughts," and so my role as the manager was um, to kind of engage them, to find out where they are, and then make that reference point to um, the suicide prevention hotline. And
Mhm.
so it's in those spaces where you're talking to people highly successful at the top of their careers, and so you would have to imagine that they must have reached a very low point in their lives to feel that ending it is the only solution. To your point, um, when we reach that place, we feel that that is the only way out, but there's always another solution. And so I think that that's the where the value of friendship comes in to place. When we can be vulnerable with people and transparent about what we're going through and what we're feeling. I can't. Well, I'll tell you. Like a friend of mine said to me, and it almost like knocked the wind out of me. He said, "If I didn't have you in my life," he said, "I probably would have taken my life." Um, and this individual is married, has a family, and just to imagine the pain that that would leave with his family of him no longer being there for for his family. But it showed me how valuable it is for us to have relationships with people.
Yes.
Then we have an opportunity for someone else to speak into us, to encourage us, to help us to see a different, maybe even a different perspective about where we are, and then to help us to navigate to an alternative direction. And I'll just say, as someone who's been there more than once and has wrestled with suicidal ideation, there's always a better way. There's always another solution that maybe you're not aware of, that maybe you haven't been introduced to yet, but there is a better way. And and anytime I talk about this topic, I love to speak into people and remind them of their value, their worth, they're loved. And because sometimes we can reach a place that's so low that we don't feel connected or attached to our worth and value anymore. So for anybody that's listening that may be at that place of on the brink of wanting to to take your life, I want to remind you how the world is a better place because of you. And even if you are in a place where you can't see that, I pray that God himself, and that he uses people to remind you of your beauty and your value, and that they can shine the light on the next step to help you to recover from this place that you're in.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I thank you for that, and I also agree with you 100% with how important your friendships, and not just your friendships, but relationships are to your life in general. But definitely when you get into those spaces, because it definitely was, my friends and family played a very strong part in helping me get from that space that I was in. And I can probably say too that if it wasn't for them constantly, pulling me from that space, constantly working with me to, open the shades, you know what I mean? Let the sun shine, and getting outside the house, even when I didn't feel like it. If it wasn't for the part that they played, there is a high chance that I might not be here. And so I definitely agree with you 100%, on the relationships, how pivotal they are in our lives, especially when we start dealing with depression and suicidal ideations. And that's why it's so important for us to have these conversations. And so that's why, I'm spending a little bit more time on this part, because number one, as men, and then as Black men, it's not a conversation that we have all the time. Right. And I always share, and I know my listeners has heard it many times, but I always share about when I first started this podcast, and which was the first time that I publicly talked about me having those suicidal ideations and really thinking about taking my life. That it was after it recorded, after it aired, one of my sisters called me and like, how did you go through that whole thing and we not know? I got 8 siblings, you know what I mean? So it's a lot of us. It was like none of us knew, and I was like, well, we're not having the conversation. And so after having that conversation with her, I make it a point to constantly have the conversation, not just on this platform, but on other podcasts that I'm a guest on. I have the conversation because I want it to be normal for us to be able to express ourselves as men, and as people who are dealing with depression, dealing with suicidal ideation, to say, look, I'm hurting and I need someone to talk to, and not to be judged, but to be understood.
Right.
So I'm very open about, that experience.
Yeah. And if I can add to that, the words that come to mind are safe spaces. Like
Yeah.
we need safe spaces in every arena of life, whether that's the church, whether that's our workplaces and our families. Even if it's like one person, like I, I've said this before and I stand by it, is that everybody needs at least one person that they can talk to about absolutely anything without the fear of judgment. Uh,
Hmm.
providing that space for people to be human and to take off the mask that we wear or the hats and the roles that we wear and fulfill in everyday life, and to disarm and to let someone or people inside of the most vulnerable places in our lives, where a lot of the secret feelings and thoughts reside. Like
Yeah.
that's the place where we have to be willing to trust someone to step into that place and to know that they won't hurt you. And sometimes people don't need you to listen to respond; they just need you to
Hmm.
listen.
Yep.
Because sometimes we can't understand what people are going through, and that's okay, you know. But we can make space for people to be able to share what's happening inside, and to leave room for them to say if they want, you know, your opinion, or if they. I'm famous for saying, I don't want you to give me your opinion. I just want you to listen,
Yeah.
unload, to unpack, and that helps with the emotional and the spiritual as well, because there's an intertwining of who we are, of how we were created. For those who are believers and believe that we were made body, soul, and spirit, there's a harmony that happens, or that needs to happen for us to be healthy. And so, for us to be well, I've learned that some things that are helpful are exercise that tends to the natural, to the body. It helps with hormones and my emotions, and helps to regulate how I'm feeling. If I'm stressed out and anxious, a great gym session, by the end of that workout, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm able to think a little bit more clearly. For the again, for the mind, like we don't talk about it enough. Like we go to our annual primary care physicians for our exams, our checkups. I can't remember the name of what it's called at the moment. But anyways, we go for our annual visits to the doctor, but we don't go nearly enough for what's above the shoulders. And so
All right.
being able to tend to the mental health is paramount. It affects how we are able to show up in life and how we are able to engage our own selves. Like sometimes in life, we can reach a state where we become detached from feeling, and we're just so submerged with weights to the point where we are like numb to what's happening inside. And that's a very scary place to be in. And so being able to be in a space to name your feelings, like to put a name to it and to unpack those feelings, is incredibly helpful, because it can make the difference between an individual who decides to take their life or doesn't. Being able to understand the roadmap of those feelings, it can make it can tremendously help in the area of depression and anxiety. Perhaps a person has um, medication for mental health has been stigmatized, which has been in a lot of different communities, in particular the Black community. But maybe they need somebody to share with them, like, and I'll say it publicly, like I even take anxiety medication because there are times in my life where I can't manage it, and it's overwhelming. And I was nervous about it. I was afraid. I thought it meant something negative about me until somebody said, that I trust and look up to and feel safe with, that maybe it's a good idea for you to do it, to try it. And it has made, a complete difference in my life. So, and then for the spiritual, um, being connected to God, I think there are things that we can express to Him that we can't express maybe to anybody else. And He understands us in ways that no one else can. When words fail us, He understands. When all we have are tears, He's able to interpret the tears. And so being able to be in a position of fellowship with God um, has provided tremendous healing for me. Um, that I can't even like put into words in this moment.
All right. Okay. So let's excuse me. Let's turn the corner a little bit because we talked about the pain, and but one of the things that I believe that there's nothing that we go through that's not for a reason, right? And so a lot of times we have to find that purpose in the pain that we've been through. And so when I was going through um, my situation, one of the things, excuse me, one of the things that God gave me was a quote that said, "Purpose, pain births purpose, purpose births progress, and progress is the evidence that God is at work." Right, and that has shown up so strongly in my life with everything that, even what I'm doing now, even the birth of this podcast, all started from a painful time in my life. But truly, God has used that, that pain in order to turn it into a purpose. And then I'm seeing, daily the progress that is being made in all the areas um, in which it is coming forth to show itself in order to shine light on my purpose. And so, in your own journey, um, how has that been? We're really sitting down and considering, not just this trauma that we mentioned, but just all the traumas in your life and things that you made it through, and realizing that there is purpose in that pain. And how have you used that to be able to kind of turn the page in your life to now take that pain and be able to help someone else?
Great question. I think that um, I didn't I didn't realize the connectedness to reclaiming my voice, and that being connected to my purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the like me sharing my story, and I've been blessed to share it globally, and the responses that like people that I receive, like people from around the world will say, "I've been through that too. Me too. How did you overcome that?" And having the opportunity to really to do life with people. Some of these individuals who have reached out have become friends of mine. And so being able to speak life into people and to speak hope into other individuals who have walked like paths or similar paths as mine, has it has been what fuels me and motivates me to continue to share my story, because it's not easy to stand on platforms and tell people that you know experienced sexual abuse and to have to relive the trauma, and sometimes describing details. When the camera is off, we sometimes are triggered, and we have those emotional triggers, and sometimes we're spiraled back to the event mentally where it happened, and it feels like we're right there again. There are times after sharing my story where I have to talk to my therapist because of the dark place that it sends me to. And so uh, my why will always be the people that sharing my story with helps, and helping, knowing that I'm helping someone else to live and not die. That is, I can't tell you the level of fulfillment that it brings me. So it's really not even about me. Um, it's Joseph being able to use his voice, and to extend his hand to his brothers, the ones that once were responsible for trying to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's in a position of power and influence, and is able to be able to help them and so many others. And that is the story of my life, of those that intended to kill me and to leave me for dead. God has put me in a place, a position, and power, and has allowed me the opportunity to use my story from those very painful experiences, and to do what he says. I think it's in Genesis 50. Can't remember the exact actual verse, but it says that what the enemy meant for evil, God turned it and made for good. And so I have the ability now to take the those evil, painful experiences and turn them into good, not just for myself, but for other people too, for the masses to know that there is hope, that you don't have to die in your pain. And I'm a believer that although hurt people, I also believe that heal people as well. And so if
Yeah.
we impact just one person, that one person is able to go how to impact somebody else as well.
All right, all right. So you've been able to not only share your story as a speaker, but also as an author, right? And so before we get out here, I want to just ask you a little bit to talk a little bit about your books and where we can find those to support you in that way.
Sure. So there are two books that I have out. The first book is called "Is God Who He Says He Is?" That book was released in 2020 or 2021. It's my autobiography, and it really details the journey of a lot of things that I've mentioned in this interview, but more specifically, the sexual identity confusion that I experienced for 6 years of my life, and wrestling with my faith and wrestling with identity, and wondering if God was really who He said He is in the scriptures. Is He really able to change the life of broken people? Is He really able to deliver like He did in, as we read about in the Gospels? And I titled the book with that question, so that by the end of the book, people could, make their decisions for themselves as I'm telling this transforming power of what God has done in my life. The second book I'm a co-author of is called Echoes: The Stories of Male Survivors Overcoming Sexual Trauma. It's an anthology project of about maybe 14, 15 authors, all who are, males who have experienced sexual trauma, and they're speaking about their experiences. Some are, you may read some stories that may start with pain and end with triumph, but there are some stories that don't necessarily, that person hasn't gotten to the triumph.
Mm-hmm.
They're able to talk about and put pen to paper about where they are in their pain. And so it's a very eye-opening, real life, up close experience of what it's like to be a male who has experienced sexual trauma. I mean, I highly encourage anybody who wants to better understand the life experiences of male sexual trauma survivors to read that book, and also the first book as well, which are both available on Amazon.
All right, all right. To my listeners, we will make sure that we put the links to both books in the description, so you guys, whether you're listening to this or watching this, can go in the description of the episode in order to get that information. Ronald, I want to thank you so very much for coming on, for sharing your story with us. I want you to have the last word, and I want you to leave us with maybe a word of advice or inspiration, have you feel, and also to leave us with where we can find you, as well as follow you and things like that, your social media. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that. To my listeners, thank you guys again for making sure that you guys following us. Make sure you also check out our websites, right? Our other websites that we have, and make sure you guys go to the dealhealfulfill.org. That's dealhealfulfill.org, which will give you more information about myself as a speaker, podcast, and author. It definitely opened up a little bit more about who I am and what I got going on, and also ways that you can hire me in order to come out to be a speaker or facilitator at your school or your organization. So make sure you guys go check that out. Also, make sure you check out our Deal to Heal Tees, which is our inspirational t-shirt line. Again, that's Deal to Heal Tees. Let me get to that. Deal to Heal Tees, which also include our podcast merch, right? Which is our t-shirts that we have for our podcast, with our podcast logos on it. The Deal to Heal logo, as well as the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, and as well as our other t-shirts that we have there on our inspirational t-shirt line, which is Deal, the number 2, Heal Tees. That's Deal to Heal Tees. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear an inspirational tee and be inspired all day. That is our tagline. So make sure you guys go and check that out. Check out our t-shirts at Deal to Heal Tees, and also make sure that you guys check out our check us out at ebooks by E James. Again, ebooksbyejames.com, where you can find our ebooks that we have available. There are several that we have available, including From Males to Men, which is a male mentoring ebook, the Core 4, which is the core 4 values that every daughter should get from her father, as well as as well as Forgiving Me, the 4 Steps to Self-Forgiveness ebooks. There's a couple ebooks there. Make sure you guys go to ebooks.ejames.com in order to check out those ebooks. And last but not least, I'm been blessed to be a part of an organization called the Forgiveness Mission, right? And what we do, we have free virtual workshops every quarter of the year talking about forgiveness, what it is, what it's not, who is it for, what does it mean to forgive. And we've been doing this for a little bit over maybe 2 years now. And so whenever you're listening to this, either one just passed or one is coming up. And we were doing them every quarter of the year. We actually now started doing them every other month. So you guys can go to forgivenessmission.com. Again, that's forgivenessmission.com. Or just go to Eventbrite in order to register. Just look up the Forgiveness Workshop held by the Forgiveness Mission, and you'll be able to find that information there. Again, it's absolutely free, and it's virtual. Means you can take it on your phone or on your laptop. Talking everything having to do with forgiveness and what that means to be able to forgive, which I think is very important. So, again, Ronald, I want to say thank you so very much for being on, for sharing your story and your expertise, and definitely for everything. For being open about the things that you have dealt with, which because again, as men and especially as Black men, we're not always as open as we should be to talk about our experiences. But it's only through sharing our experiences do we really show how much we care and how much we can help heal each other. So I thank you so very much for being on. And I want you to have the last word. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Ernest, for having me on as a guest. And I hope that something that was shared tonight was helpful to someone. I always like to end interviews when I'm invited to share my stories, to remind people that there is always hope, regardless of what you have experienced in life, regardless of the pain that you may live with every day. There's always hope for a better version of you, a better tomorrow. I've after doing a lot of the work that I've done on this journey of healing, I've come to realize that the lies that I believed that I would always live in the pain of my trauma was actually that it was a lie. And so there's healing available for you. As I mentioned earlier, that healing is our journey, and whatever your destination of wholeness looks like, it's up to you to define that. As someone, again, who's experienced multiple forms of trauma, I've come to realize that our traumas don't have to define us. If you're a believer, God defines us. If you don't necessarily believe in the divine, then perhaps you have the ability to define who you are. And so I just want to speak life into people. If you have not, if you're like on the fence about whether or not to connect with a therapist, I would highly encourage you to do it. I believe that once you find the right person, very well could change your life. So I'll just leave it there, and thank you again for the opportunity to share.
Okay. Do you want to share any of your social media links or website or anything like that where we can find you?
Sure. So I can be found on Instagram at I am Ron J. McCray. McCray is spelled MCCRAY. Facebook at Ronald J. McCray. McCray is spelled the same way. And I'm barely on TikTok, so it's not noteworthy to give you my TikTok handle.
No problem. We can't end it no better than that. To my listeners, thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, where our mission is to help you to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with your problems, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thank you guys for tuning in. Until next time, you guys be blessed. Thanks for listening to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. Remember to listen, like, subscribe, and share. This episode has been brought to you by Deal to Heal Teas. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear an inspirational tea and be inspired all day. is go to dealstohealtees.myshopify.com. Remember, our mission is to help you to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for listening.